What if the only witness to a brutal frontier crime was a child too young to speak? And what if the one man who could uncover the truth had already buried his past for good? If you've ever wondered whether redemption can ride again in the West, this story is for you. Stick around, because what begins in silence ends with a promise that'll break you and rebuild you. The sun had barely risen over the scarred hills of Red Hollow when the scream echoed through the valley. A sharp, keening sound that didn't belong to any bird or beast. Just a mile off the old overland trail, the last embers of a burning wagon sputtered into ash, painting the morning air with the acrid scent of charred wood and blood. Among the wreckage, where twisted iron met scorched earth, a woman lay still, her dress torn, her shawl soaked crimson, and her final breath long faded into the breeze. Her name had been Caroline Hargrove, though the men who'd ambushed her family hadn't cared. What they'd wanted was in the saddlebag now buried beneath rubble and soot, burned to near nothing. What they hadn't expected was for her to die protecting it. 10 feet away, curled beneath the blackened frame of the wagon, a girl no older than 8 lay trembling and silent. Her dress was scorched at the edges, her palms bloodied from crawling through gravel and glass. But her eyes burned brighter than the fire. Wide and unblinking, they clung to the man who now knelt beside her. He'd come from the wheat fields at dawn, following the trail of smoke like a bloodhound, rifle slung over his back, boots caked with soil and memory. He hadn't fired a gun in 5 years, not since the last time a bullet whistled past his ear in the border wars. Not since he'd left behind the name Colt McAllister and become just Mac, the quiet man who raised horses and lived alone. But when he saw the girl, saw what was left of her family, something ancient stirred in him. "You hurt, little one?" he asked, voice low, calm as river water. The girl didn't speak, only shook her head and pressed a hand to her chest. He saw then the necklace, simple, silver, carved with a symbol he hadn't seen since his bounty days. A 6-pointed star inside a circle. It wasn't lawman silver. No, this was something older. Secret. "Where's your ma?" he asked gently. The girl pointed toward the woman's body, and Mac's heart sank with the weight of the world. He didn't ask more. He just scooped her into his arms, careful of the bruises, and turned back toward his horse. The prairie behind him was quiet again, the silence of death and scorched earth. They rode for nearly an hour through the red clay paths toward Whispering Oaks, a place not marked on any map, nestled between hills and time. Mac's homestead stood like a stubborn relic, all stone and sweat-built lumber. As he swung down from the saddle and helped the girl dismount, his mind reeled, not just with what he'd seen, but with what might come next. He brought her inside, gave her water, cleaned the cuts on her palms. Still, she hadn't spoken a word. Not until he offered her an old wool blanket and pointed to the cot by the fire. Then, soft as a ghost's breath, she asked, "Will they come back?" Mac paused. "They might." "Will they find us?" His jaw clenched. "Not if I find them first." That night, after the girl had drifted into a restless sleep, Mac sat by the fire, turning over the necklace in his hand. That symbol, it meant something. Something tied to old debts, old secrets. He'd seen it once on a letter carried by a U.S. Marshal who died 2 days later. Caroline Hargrove hadn't died for nothing. Whatever she'd been protecting, it was dangerous enough to bring fire and blood. And now her daughter, what was her name? He still didn't know, carried the weight of it. Mac looked over at the sleeping child, curled small beneath his old quilt, and felt something shift in his chest. Not pity, not obligation, a promise. "I don't know what they wanted," he murmured to the fire, "but I'll find out. For her. For you, Caroline, whoever you were." Outside, a storm gathered over the plains, and Mac McAllister, once a killer, now a quiet man with a farm, began to remember how to be dangerous again. By the second morning, the girl had spoken only 3 words. "Mama, they, and come." It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep Mac up at night. He found her in the barn before dawn, sitting cross-legged in the straw beside his old mare Penny, humming a tune that made his spine tighten. It wasn't a child's song. It was old, Appalachian maybe, with a rhythm that whispered like wind through church ruins. "You sleep out here?" Mac asked, keeping his tone light. She nodded. "Safer." He didn't argue. Who was he to say otherwise? She'd survived a massacre. Her instincts were probably sharper than most men's by now. By midday, Mac had made two decisions. First, he needed to figure out what Caroline Hargrove had died for. Second, the girl couldn't stay hidden forever. If whoever killed her family came looking, they wouldn't stop at fences or front doors. So he started with the only clue he had, her necklace. He took out an old lockbox from the back of his closet, blew the dust off the lid, and opened it. Inside were scraps from a life he'd tried to bury. A U.S. Marshal badge he never officially wore, a bounty poster with his own face sketched poorly, and three folded maps of territories that no longer existed under the same names. And at the bottom, a leather-bound field journal with names, contacts, and symbols, including the same one carved into the girl's necklace. Mac traced the star and circle pattern with a calloused finger. "The Harrow Sigil," he muttered. He remembered now, a breakaway faction of ex-soldiers and outlaws who'd started calling themselves the Harrow Confederacy after the war. Not Confederates, not Union. Something darker. They believed the old government had betrayed its citizens and sought to replace it from the shadows. They trafficked in stolen documents, military ledgers, bribes, and blood. Caroline had been carrying something they wanted silenced. That night, Max sat at the table with the girl across from him. He handed her a worn pencil and a sheet of lined paper. "I don't want to scare you," he said slowly, "but I need to know what your mama gave her life for, what they were after. Anything you remember, anything at all." She hesitated. Then she took the pencil and began to draw. Not words, images. First a folded envelope, then a symbol that matched the necklace. Then a seal, wax, red as blood. When she handed him the paper, Max stared at it for a long time. "Where was this?" he asked. She pointed toward the fire, then mimed pulling something from beneath the wagon. Buried, hidden. Max stood. "You stay here. I need to go back." Her eyes widened. "They'll be watching." "Let 'em," he said, his voice hardening like old iron. "They've already taken too much." Before dawn the next morning, Max saddled up. He left the girl with a rifle and strict instructions. "If anyone but me comes through that gate, you shoot first and yell later," and set out across the plains toward the site of the attack. The ride was cold and quiet. He kept low, used old paths the cattlemen had long abandoned, and approached the blackened clearing from the north. The wagon remains were mostly ash and rust, but he found it, just as she'd drawn, a shallow pit beneath the charred axle. Inside, a tin box with a scorched top. Inside that, a folded parchment sealed with red wax. Mac didn't break the seal, not yet, but he tucked it into his coat with the reverence of a man carrying a stick of lit dynamite. Then just as he turned to leave, a noise. Not the wind. Hoofbeats. He flattened behind the wreckage, hand on his colt. Three riders, broad hats, black coats, not locals, not ranchers. They circled the site like wolves. One of them dismounted, kicked through the ashes, cursed under his breath. "She ain't here," the man growled. "Neither's the satchel," another answered. "That means someone got to it first." A pause. "Go east. Search every ranch within 10 miles. Start with McAllister's." Mac didn't move, didn't breathe. He waited until the riders vanished over the ridge, then slipped away like a shadow in reverse. Back at the homestead, the girl was waiting on the porch, rifle across her lap like a soldier. "You came back," she whispered. "Didn't plan on doing otherwise," Max said. He handed her the box. "This is what your mama died for." The girl didn't ask what was inside. She just nodded once. Then she did something unexpected. She reached for his hand. "You'll stop them?" she asked. Mac looked at the firelight flickering across her bruised cheek, at the raw strength beneath all that fear. "Yeah," he said, "I will." Because somewhere between that burning wagon and this old farmhouse, he'd made a decision bigger than revenge. He wasn't just going to stop the men who did this. He was going to finish what Caroline Hargrove started, no matter what it cost him. 3 days after Mac McAllister found the sealed document beneath the wreckage, he knew exactly what it meant. He didn't need to break the wax to understand the weight of it. The symbol alone, the Harrow sigil, was proof. The parchment likely held names, routes, bribe ledgers, or military supply lists. Evidence. Enough to bury a man or burn a town, and men had already died to keep it secret. The girl, Emma, she'd finally whispered on the second night, was healing in quiet ways. She still didn't talk much, but she'd stopped sleeping in the barn and started helping around the ranch, feeding the chickens, sweeping the porch, leaving small bundles of wildflowers at the windowsill, like offerings to a god she no longer trusted. She was watching Mac too, watching the way he walked the perimeter at night, the way his fingers drummed against his revolver when he thought no one noticed, the way he muttered to the wind like he was arguing with ghosts. "What happens now?" she asked one morning, her voice thin but steady. Mac looked up from his saddle repair. "Now," he said, "I send a message." By sundown, he'd ridden out to the old telegraph office in Dry Hollow, a one-building town with 2 residents and a mule that kicked harder than whiskey. The operator, Jonas, was half blind and fully drunk, but he owed Mac favors from a long-forgotten bounty job. "Need a secure line," Mac said, tossing a silver dollar onto the counter. Jonas blinked. "That kind of day, huh?" Mac slid the folded note across the desk. It read, "To U.S. Marshal Edward Harlan, Helena office. Subject, Hargrove ledger found. Confirm safe handover. Hostile actors active. Signed, M. McAllister." Jonas read it twice, then nodded. "They'll get it by morning. You got heat on you?" "Not yet," Mac said, tipping his hat. "But it's coming." He was right. By the time he returned to the ranch, the smoke on the horizon told him everything he needed to know. The barn was burning. He galloped up the rise, heart hammering, rifle drawn. But the house, thank God, the house was still standing. Emma was there on the porch, clutching the rifle he'd left her and breathing hard. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes wild, but she was whole. "They came," she gasped. "3 men. They lit the barn. I shot at one." Mac jumped off Penny and swept her into his arms, holding her tighter than he meant to. "You did good," he murmured. "You did real good." Then his voice turned cold. "Did they take anything?" Emma nodded. "The saddlebags." Mac's stomach sank. That's where the sealed parchment had been. He found one of the attackers slumped near the creek, bleeding from a shoulder wound. Emma's bullet had clipped him. Not fatal, but enough to knock him off his horse. Mac dragged him into the shed and tied him to a post. "Talk," he said, voice like gravel. The man spat blood and laughed. "You think this ends with me? You got no idea what you're messing with, old man. That girl, she's a ledger herself, witness to what shouldn't exist." Mac knelt. "Who sent you?" The man hesitated, then smiled with broken teeth. "Harrow's not a group. It's a shadow. You can't shoot a shadow." Mac stood. "We'll see." Then he left him there, alive, but hog-tied. Let the sheriff in Dry Hollow deal with what was left of him. That night, as the barn smoldered behind them, Mac sat on the porch with Emma wrapped in a quilt beside him. "You don't have to stay," she said. Her voice was a whisper, but the message was clear. "You can walk away." Mac didn't answer at first. He stared at the firelight flickering in her eyes. "I walked away from too much already," he said finally. "I was done with this life. The law. The fighting. Thought I could bury it with the past." He looked down at her. "Then you showed up." Emma didn't reply, but she leaned against him, small and silent and impossibly brave. "There's still a copy," she whispered. "Mama made 2. Mac froze. "Where?" Emma pointed east. "A church, Cross Hollow. She hid it behind the altar." "Cross Hollow?" Mac said. "That's 2 days' ride through Indian Ridge. Bad country." She looked up. "I can show you." He exhaled. "You're staying here." "I'll go." Emma grabbed his hand. "They'll kill you." Mac squeezed hers back. "Maybe, but they'll never find that church without you. And that makes you the only card we got left to play." She didn't let go of his hand for a long time. Neither did he. The morning air was cold enough to bite. Mac McAllister saddled Penny before sunrise, boots crunching over frost-crusted dirt, saddle leather creaking like old bones. He moved with quiet purpose, no wasted motion, no second thoughts. Emma watched from the porch, wrapped in a patched shawl too big for her, holding the little stuffed bird he'd carved her from pinewood. "You remember everything I said?" Mac asked, checking his cinch. Emma nodded. "Lock the doors. Stay away from the windows. If someone knocks, I don't answer unless it's you. And," she hesitated, "shoot twice, then run for the ravine." Mac gave a tight nod. "Good." He climbed into the saddle, adjusted his rifle on the sling, and looked down at her, small, pale, but made of something stronger than most men he'd known. "I'll be back in 3 days." "What if you're not?" she asked, quiet but firm. Mac didn't lie. "Then you'll know I tried." The ride to Cross Hollow was long and mean. Indian Ridge was a mess of switchbacks, wind tunnels, and memories Mac had spent years trying to forget. Every pass he crossed felt like a grave marker. Every canyon echoed with the ghosts of lost men and bad decisions. He kept to the brush, moving low, quiet. The Harrow men would be watching the roads. At dusk, he made camp beneath a rock overhang. The stars were already out, sharp and cold and far too quiet. Mac unrolled his bedroll and leaned back, staring into the fire with narrowed eyes. The parchment was gone. The barn was ash. But Emma had remembered something none of the bastards chasing them knew. Her mother's second copy of the ledger, hidden in a chapel where no one had looked. Cross Hollow. A half-burned mining town turned ghost village turned makeshift parish, kept alive only by the prayers of an old preacher and a stubborn bell that refused to fall. By noon the next day, Max saw the belfry. The town was as dead as he remembered. Collapsed roofs, wind-worn signs, bones of wagons long since abandoned. But the church still stood. Barely. Its whitewashed boards were gray with age, the steeple leaning like a drunk uncle at a wedding. The doors were open, creaking in the wind. Mac dismounted, tied Penny near a trough that hadn't held water in a decade, and stepped inside. Dust swirled in the sunbeams through cracked stained glass. The pews were splintered. The altar was draped with a moth-eaten cloth, faded gold embroidery spelling out, "He shall be their refuge." Mac lifted the cloth. Nothing underneath. He checked behind the altar, loose boards, warped floor panels. One gave way with a dull crack. Inside the hollow, a wax-sealed envelope marked with the same Hargrove crest as the one that burned. He exhaled just once and slipped the document into his coat. Then he heard the horses. They came hard and fast. 4 riders, no markings, long rifles slung across their backs, and dust trailing them like storm clouds. Mac dashed through the back door just as bullets tore through the chapel walls. He dove behind a crumbling gravestone, drawing his revolver. "You got nowhere to run, McAllister!" one of them shouted. Mac gritted his teeth. Of course they knew his name. He counted footsteps, watched shadows, then stood and fired. One man dropped before the rest scattered. Mac ran, weaving between broken fences, up the ravine that led behind the cemetery. He knew these hills. They didn't. That was his advantage. He made them chase him uphill, into the tight canyon where the walls squeezed close, and sound bounced like thunder. A mistake. Their mistake. Mac stopped behind a ridge and waited. The first rider came around the bend, rifle high. Mac shot him clean through the chest. The second tried to turn back, took a round to the shoulder, and fell from his horse, screaming. The third didn't follow. Mac climbed the ridge and scanned the basin. Empty, until he heard the whistle. A sharp note rising and falling like a warning on the wind. Another rider, behind him now. Mac turned. Too late. The butt of a rifle slammed into his temple. He woke to the sound of crackling fire. Blood ran into his right eye, warm and sticky. His wrists were bound. His back rested against a cold rock. A man sat across from him, legs crossed, coat trimmed in silver. Not a Harrow thug, not just a hired gun. Someone bigger. "You're a hard man to find, McAllister," he said, voice smooth as oil. Max squinted at him. "Name? Doesn't matter. What matters is what you have." Max said nothing. The man stood and pulled the envelope from Max's coat. "This ledger? This is the kind of thing that ends careers. Governments even. But people like us? He smiled. We bury things. He tossed the envelope into the fire. Mac lunged forward, but the rope held. The parchment curled in the flames, blackening at the edges. Then something incredible happened. It didn't burn. The wax cracked, but the inner page, thicker, oiled against flame, refused to catch. The man cursed and kicked the fire over, scattering ash. Too late. Mac was already moving. He twisted, rolled, reached for the embers, and the rock near them. When the stranger turned, Mac swung. The stone struck hard. The man dropped. Mac didn't wait. He grabbed the half-burned ledger, cut his wrists free with the man's own knife, and ran. Back toward the trail, toward Penny, toward Emma. The storm came hard that night. Cold, wild, and too fast to outrun. Mac rode through it like a man chased by devils, the half-burned ledger wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside his duster. Penny galloped without question, hooves striking the slick mud with muscle memory born from years of survival. But no matter how fast they rode, Mac knew time was against them. He was injured. His head pounded from the blow. His right eye had swollen nearly shut. And somewhere behind him, one of those harrow riders was still alive. They always left one alive, to follow, to finish. Back at the ranch, Emma was waiting. She hadn't lit the lantern. Mac had told her not to, but she'd swept the porch twice, boiled water on the stove, left a towel by the door, folded in thirds. She kept watch from the window, the way her mother once did when storms rolled in and her father stayed late mending fences. She didn't cry anymore. She hadn't cried since the night her mama died in that canyon. Now she just waited, one small hand on the rifle, the other pressed against the carved wooden sparrow Mac had left her for luck. When the hooves came thundering through the trees, she stood. When she heard him cough, his cough, she opened the door before he could dismount. He stumbled inside like a ghost. She helped him to the chair, hands shaking. You made it. Mac gave a faint, bloody grin. Told you I would. Then he passed out cold. He slept through the next morning. When he woke, his wounds were clean, his coat drying by the fire, and the ledger sat on the table, now fully opened, its contents carefully laid out by small, steady hands. Emma. She'd found the coded sections, understood the key. Mac had seen it only once before. Military cipher, the kind used when you didn't trust the courier. I used Mama's glasses, Emma said when he stirred. She taught me how to read code, said numbers always told the real story. Mac leaned forward, pain shooting through his ribs. What did it say? Emma looked at him, not like a child, but like someone who'd seen too much too young. There's land deeds, fake ones, stamped by dead officials. Mine's marked as dry that still pull silver. It's all signed by one man. She pushed a page toward him. Senator Alan Royce. Mac exhaled, long and low. Royce wasn't just a politician. He owned half the freight lines from Montana to Missouri. His brother ran the Pinkerton branch in Denver. His son commanded a cavalry unit near Butte, and he had just sent killers to silence a girl. Emma stood. We have to tell someone. Mac didn't answer right away. He was staring into the fire again, like it held a verdict only he could read. There's no someone left, kid, he finally said. You go to the sheriff. He sends word to the territorial judge. That judge was appointed by Royce. Go to the cavalry? That's his son's outfit. Emma's voice cracked. Then what do we do? Mac looked up at her, and for the first time since she arrived, she saw not just the quiet man who saved her, but the soldier he used to be. We send it where no one can burn it. That afternoon, Mac took Emma into the root cellar beneath the smokehouse. He pulled up a false board and revealed something she hadn't expected. A safe, dusty, iron-walled, and marked with the seal of the Union Army. What is that? Mac opened it slowly. Inside were papers, stamped orders, an old Navy Colt revolver, and a single photograph, faded but whole. In it, Mac wore a captain's uniform. The woman beside him smiled like she hadn't known war yet. My wife, he said quietly, and the last job I ever did for the government. I delivered a ledger just like this one, exposed a general, burned a city down from the inside. He looked at her. I know where this needs to go. There's a man in Chicago, General Lionel Haskins. Retired now. But he'll remember me. Emma swallowed hard. Can we trust him? Mac smiled. Not many men left I'd bet my life on, but he's one of them. He picked up the ledger and handed it to her. You're going to deliver it. Her eyes widened. Me? You? Not on horseback. On the rail line. Passenger train from Promise Creek. You'll go as my niece. Letter in hand. Nobody's chasing a little girl with a book. Her voice broke. What about you? Mac paused, then placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Someone's got to slow them down. That night, as the fire died and the storm rolled in again, Mac watched her sleep on the cot by the hearth, clutching the leather satchel to her chest. He knew what was coming. They'd come for him. Harrow's men. Royce's men. Maybe both. But they'd be too late, because Emma Parker, the last witness of a massacre, was already headed for the truth. And Mac McAllister was about to make sure she got there, no matter the cost. The dawn was red, not gold like most Montana mornings, not soft, but red, like warning, like fire. Mac stood in front of the barn, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes fixed on the tree line. Penny was saddled, but he wouldn't ride her today. She'd carry Samuel Jenkins, the stable hand's youngest son, into Promise Creek with one mission: make sure Emma got on that train. First light, no delays, no detours. You sure about this? Samuel asked, voice trembling more than he wanted it to. Mac nodded. I ain't meant for cities, Sam, and she ain't meant to stay hidden. Samuel tightened the reins. You trained me, Mac. You showed me how to shoot straight, ride hard, read men. Let me fight with you. Mac smiled, slow and tired. I didn't train you to die, boy. I trained you to keep things going when I'm gone. That shut the kid up. When Samuel rode off down the eastern trail with Emma and the satchel in tow, Mac turned back toward the ranch house. He didn't have long. They'd be coming soon. He made coffee, real strong, stronger than usual. Mrs. Holloway would have called it tar. He poured a cup, sat on the porch, and watched the valley breathe. Everything was still, too still. Then he saw them, 5 riders, one with a wide-brim hat, the kind that covered eyes and intentions. The others were muscle, fast, cruel, impatient. They didn't stop to knock. The leader dismounted slow, boots crunching on the gravel. He looked like a man who had never worked a day of honest ranch life. McAllister, he said, voice oiled and smooth. You got something belongs to my employer. Mac sipped his coffee. Don't reckon I do. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. A girl, a ledger, a problem. Mac stood, setting the cup down. Train left at dawn. You're late. The man's face soured. Where'd she go? To see justice done. A pause, a breath. Then the smile returned, but it was all teeth now. You know how this ends, don't you? Mac walked off the porch, slowly rolling his sleeves. I do, with you bleeding on my dirt. The first shot rang out from the barn. Mac had rigged the hayloft with a tripwire and 2 scatterguns, old cavalry tricks. One of the riders flew backward, peppered with buckshot. The others scattered, returning fire as they dove behind water troughs and fence posts. Mac didn't run. He walked, deliberate, steady, ghost-like. He dropped the second man with a clean shot through the gut. The third tried flanking from the left but caught a blade instead. Mac's old Bowie, thrown underhand, fast and low. Only the smooth talker and one more remained. The fourth man charged straight on. Mac let him come. They collided near the well, fists and elbows in grit. Mac took a knife across the ribs, but the younger man ended up face down in the mud, motionless. The leader clapped slowly from the barn doors. Impressive for an old man. Mac wiped blood from his lip. You're not the first snake I've cut the head off. The man drew. Mac drew faster. 1 shot. That was all. The stranger's eyes widened in disbelief as he clutched his chest, knees buckling. He looked more insulted than scared. Then he collapsed. Dead. The rain came after. Cold. Cleansing. Mac stood alone, surrounded by silence and bodies. He lit the last of his cigarettes, breathing in smoke and ache. Then he limped to the porch and sat back down. Later that evening, a dust cloud rose on the horizon. It was Sheriff Thompson and 3 Union men from Fort Wallace. They didn't ask much when they saw what lay in the dirt. Just nodded and started loading the bodies for burial. "You all right, Mac?" the sheriff asked. Mac looked west toward the sunset. "I'm tired," he said honestly. "And Emma?" "Safe." Thompson put a hand on his shoulder. "That ledger, it's already changing things. Royce's men are being called in for questioning. The fort's cleaning house. You did more than just save a girl." Mac didn't reply. He was thinking of her face, the way she'd looked back from the saddle before riding into the wind, that last moment when she whispered, "Find me again." Weeks passed, then months. One day a letter came. Cream paper, sharp handwriting. "I made it. The general's helping. They're calling it the Promise Creek Testimony. They say your name like it means something. Come find me when the snow melts." Inside the envelope, tucked between words and hope, was the wooden sparrow, polished, whole. Max smiled. For the first time in years, he began to pack a bag, because maybe, just maybe, a man like him could still find a reason to ride again. And so, across these unforgiving lands, another tale drifts away with the wind. If this quiet courage, this stubborn heart touched you in any way, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass this story on to someone who needs it. Don't forget to subscribe, because out here there are still so many truths left to tell, each one carved from pain, hope, and dust. This is Wild West Stories. Thank you for watching.